English words for their Hebrew counterparts only. In many cases, this in itself is impossible. As is the case in most languages, each individual word may contain several meanings, unless one understands the overall plan of Yahweh and its final fulfillment, and compares it with the conditions under which the events were recorded. That is, the limited understanding of the Israel of old as to how these promised blessings would materialize. The inspired words cannot be properly translated as to the meaning intended. Israel believed that their nation would be restored on earth in its entirety. The magnitude of Yahweh's plan, wherein Jerusalem, the ruling city with her king, would be elevated and placed in the heavens, was far too much to grasp without the direct and timely intervention of His Holy Spirit to make this unfathomable and therefore unexpected move understood. Even with all of this, it was not until these last days that the mystery has finally cleared up. A case in point is the promise of the coming of the Messiah as is recorded in Daniel 9:25. Although the 26th verse makes mention of the Messiah being cut off, it does not appear that the Israel of old could comprehend what they considered a blessed event of fulfillment, and this with an apparently inharmonious statement of the cutting off of the one who was to bring the blessings before they had a chance to be realized. In spite of this, the hope of Israel leaned toward an earthly fulfillment of the Messiah's reign, as these two verses bear out. John 1:41, He first findeth his own brother Simon, and saith unto him, We have found the Messiah, which is being interpreted the Christ. John 4:25, The woman saith unto him, I know that Messiah cometh, which is called Christ. When he is come, he will tell us all things. Yahweh's Israel of promise has now been blessed beyond measure with the understanding of his plan and the translation and interpretation of Daniel 9:24-27. The limited understanding of this by the Israel of old will be presented and compared with the true manner of fulfillment that Yahweh has seen fit to bless Ephraim, or that portion of Israel which receives and maintains the birthright forever. In the sublinear translation into English of the Hebrew directly above it, the reading will be from right to left in the manner that the Hebrew language is written. If you can read the English translation from right to left, the theme should not be too difficult to follow, even though in critical areas the Hebrew idiom is maintained as proof of accuracy of translation. These, along with all of the subjects either mentioned or alluded to, will be more copiously treated in the interpretation. In order to attain as nearly a complete understanding as may be possible of Daniel 9:24-27, we must be as thorough as possible and attempt to convey in modern English just what the Israel of old, from Daniel's time to the coming of Yahshua, read, and just what they understood, if anything, of the true meaning intended in the words of this prophecy. It was Daniel who, according to Yahweh's angel, was greatly beloved, Daniel 9:23, and who first understood the word of Yahweh that came to Jeremiah, that 70 years would elapse from the beginning to the end of this particular desolation of Jerusalem. That is, they would remain for 70 years under the hand of Babylon, Jeremiah 25:10-13, 2 Chronicles 36:20 and 21. And after this period of time elapsed, the return and the rebuilding of Jerusalem would begin, Ezra 1:1-11. This calamity that now befell them, Yahweh had already threatened them with even long before the time of Jeremiah, as Leviticus 26:31-35 bears out. Quote, And I will make your cities waste, and bring your sanctuaries unto desolation, and I will not smell the savor of sweet odors, and I will bring the land into desolation, and your enemies which dwell therein shall be astonished at it. And I will scatter you among the heathen, and will draw out a sword after you, and your land shall be desolate, and your cities waste. Then shall the land enjoy her Sabbaths, as long as it lieth desolate, and ye be in your enemy's hand, that is, in your enemy's land. Even then shall the land rest, and enjoy her Sabbaths. As long as it lieth desolate, it shall rest, because it did not rest in your Sabbaths when ye dwelt upon it. All of these former threats of destruction and the actual destruction by Babylon with the 70 years of captivity, and even including the rebuilding of Jerusalem, were of course only typical. The threats of destruction were made to a typical Israel, an Israel of the flesh, which was under the law. The Israel of the flesh is not the Israel Yahweh, as Romans 9 bears out. A father does not threaten his children with death and destruction. True children who have the attributes of Yahweh are all-loving, all-wise, and altogether just Father, and who have Zion, Yahweh's wife, as our mother, that is, those who are nourished by her, need not fear that their parents will destroy them. The love that Yahweh has for his children is far greater than we have for our children, hard as this may be to understand. The truth of the matter is that the greater our knowledge and insight into that which motivates a righteously disposed person, the more our love for them increases, even though they may make mistakes which are unintentional, and with no evil intended. Compare this with the insight and understanding that our all-wise Father has for us, and you may begin to get an inkling of the deep and tender love that Yahweh has for us, his children. The sufferings of the Israel of promise are the sufferings of growing children who must be corrected, chastised, at times even as a person may spank his children. The parents do this out of concern for the welfare of the children, because they truly love them. We find this in Revelation 3:19. As many as I love, I rebuke and chasten. Be zealous for and repent. Also Hebrews 12:5-8. And ye have forgotten the exhortation which speaketh unto you as unto children. My son, despise not thou the chastening of the Lord, nor faint when thou art rebuked of him. For whom the Lord loveth, he chasteneth, and scourgeth every son whom he receiveth. If ye endure chastening, God dealeth with you as with sons. For what son is he whom the Father chasteneth not? But if ye be without chastisement, whereof all are partakers, then are ye bastards and not sons. The awakening through education of the true children of Yahweh, true Israel, or the Israel of promise, causes us to realize that it is only just that we share this love with our all-loving Father, and we begin to do all that we can to vindicate his holy name. Among numerous worldly societies who, through careless indifference in their choice of what is supposedly truth, have given the devil and his demons immeasurable opportunity to base their beliefs on foundations of falsehood which depart wholly from the motivating attributes of love, justice, wisdom, and power, by which Yahweh and all of his holy organization moves forward as is illustrated in Ezekiel chapter 1. To those who may ask as to how many people the devil has deceived through man's careless indifference in the choice of his religion, a choice that should be made only after searching with all of our heart, all of our soul, and all of our might, the same all-consuming love and zeal that we should contain in our hearts for Yahweh and for the furtherance of his purpose. This has not been the case with by far the great majority of the people. We find that the devil with his demons has had the almost unbelievable opportunity of deceiving the whole world. Revelation 12:9. A great measure of this success on the devil's part is, of course, attributable to his control over all of the governments of this world, many of which are firm on what belief you may or may not practice. Others, which supposedly permit freedom of religion, will not take direct steps to outlaw us as yet, as long as we place them in first place and Yahweh in second. This, of course, Israel will not do. Even these governments will soon enact laws that will be directed at putting an end to Yahweh's work as performed by his people Israel. Psalm 2. The translation of these verses follows this brief introduction, to be followed in turn by an interpretation of the translation. Weeks of years, 70, are decreed on behalf of your people and on behalf of city holy, for the imprisonment of transgression, and to put an end to sin offering, and to pay the ransom for punishment of iniquity, and to bring righteousness everlasting, to seal up the adultery and the prophet, and to anoint the Holy of Holies, you will understand through your searching that between the utterance of the word to return and to build Jerusalem unto Moshiach, leader, week 7 shall be, and weeks 60 and 2. You will return in order to rebuild it with street and trench, though for you these will be distressful times. And after the weeks 60 and 2, cut off shall be Moshiach, and we are left with nothing without him. And the city and all that is sacred is forsaken, empty. People, leader, shall enter that final judicial decree in an overflow of angry judgment. And until the end, warfare, and from this time on are determined for you horrors. And a great Lord with a covenant shall greatly increase with the majority of the people for week 1, and cut in 2 the week, or half of that time, shall cause the everlasting seat of authority to be slaughtered as a sacrifice and offering, and upon those whom he has cornered under his wing, a detestable and appalling desolation, even until the allotted time be accomplished for the complete destruction of this one who has been appointed in command by making himself acceptable. This side chamber of deceit and oppression shall himself be rendered desolate. All right, now for the interpretation. Weeks of years 70, or 70 weeks of years are decreed. The words of years are not found in the Hebrew text. There are no distinguishing differences in the spelling of the word week, whether it is referring to a literal week of 7 days or of 7 years. Both in the singular are pronounced sheva. The plural weeks is shabuim. The separation as to which meaning was intended was decided by the intelligence of the reader or listener, whichever the case might be. Thus we find that Jacob had to fulfill a week of service to his father-in-law as a payment for Rachel. He fulfilled this week, which was 7 years of service. Genesis 29:27-30. Fulfill her week, and we will give thee this also for the service with which thou shalt serve with me yet 7 other years. And Jacob did so, and fulfilled her week, and he gave him Rachel, his daughter to wife also. And Laban gave to Rachel his daughter Bilhah, his handmaid, to be her maid. And he went also unto Rachel, and he loved also Rachel more than Leah, and served with him yet 7 other years. The ancient Hebrew was a primitive language according to our standards of today, but the sharp intelligence of the listener clung to the context of what was being said, and this more than made up for the absence of the innumerable descriptive words in use today. Thus, future historical events, such as from the time of the utterance of the word to return and to build Jerusalem, the coming of the Messiah, the cutting off of the Messiah, still another conquering of the city, which is in turn again left desolate, to be followed by a long period of warfare and horrors, the rise of the abomination of desolation, the final destruction. Certainly all of this could not be fulfilled in 70 weeks of 7 days each, or in 490 days, or in a year and 4 months. The intelligent Jew would not even raise a single question as to how long it would all take. He would simply compute in his mind 70 weeks of years, or 490 years. In contrast to this, Leviticus 25:8-10 is very descriptive when compared to Genesis 29:27-30 and Daniel 9:24-27. Quote Leviticus 25:8-10. And thou shalt number 7 Sabbaths of years unto thee, 7 times 7 years. And the space of the 7 Sabbaths of years shall be unto thee 49 years. Then shalt thou cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 10th of the 7th month. In the day of the atonement shall ye make the sound of the trumpet sound throughout all your land. And ye shall hallow the 50th year, and proclaim liberty throughout all the land unto all the inhabitants thereof. It shall be a jubilee unto you, and ye shall return every man unto his possession, and ye shall return every man unto his family. No figuring out here. Nothing is left to the imagination or chanced by the deciphering of man. Why? Because it was an ordinance instituted by Yahweh of a type that was to have a universal fulfillment, even though at the time it did alleviate some of the inequalities that were bound to manifest themselves in as yet an imperfect system. Yahweh would not begin to administer a perfect system to a people whose hearts were not perfect toward him. Yahweh, by establishing this type or making this model, was doing it primarily for the benefit of true Israel in the last days, because the final structure that it typified could then be more readily understood after viewing the pattern for this true Israel that Yahweh will use to implement it. It was the archetype of something so vast in scope and complexity that the Israel of that era could not have begun to understand it. They had seen nothing that they could relate to it. Israel at that time was not only ignorant of the finished product, they did not even understand the blueprint, the lines that Yahweh was drawing with them in order to represent this structure. For this reason, everything had to be described explicitly as to what to do and when to do it. For Israel at that time was in total ignorance, and Yahweh had given them no clues when he was making the pattern. Therefore, they were in no position to interpret for themselves whether the week was meant to be a week of days or a week of years. Now that the weeks are understood to be made up of years and not days, we will continue. Weeks of years 70 are decreed, or 70 weeks of years are decreed. The word translated decreed is from Old Hebrew roots made up of netek. Ne, lead or lead to. Hetek, cutting off. In this case, leading to the cutting off of time or allotted time, decreed on behalf of your people, the Jews of which Daniel was a part of, and on behalf of the holy city, the city that Yahweh had used to deal with Israel. Whatever Yahweh does is perfect, without fault, and wholly devoted to righteousness, and therefore holy. The Lord is righteous in all his ways and holy in all of his works. Psalm 145:17. Holy as far as Yahweh was concerned, but as soiled as a menstruous cloth when viewed as to the activities of the occupants within the city. Now we continue. For the imprisonment, kelah, confinement, restraint, imprisonment, to cut off from circulation of transgression, to cease, to break out beyond the borders of the law. In this case, beyond the borders of righteousness and that which is holy. To put an end to sin offering. This refers to the sacrificial sin offering which, when carried out in sincerity, demonstrated a righteous heart toward Yahweh. However, this was not the price, nor even a minute portion of the price that had to be paid in order to remove forever the curse of death that was brought about through inherited sin. In this regard, the sin offering as practiced by Israel was only typical of an immeasurably greater and perfect sacrifice which, when once offered, would pay for the sins of mankind once and forever, and to pay the ransom for the punishment of iniquity. This was the ransom that was to be paid by Yahshua. It was this ransom that, when once paid, would remove the death sentence that was automatically passed on each and every individual. This death sentence was the punishment of iniquity, or the punishment for inherited sin. How much Israel of old understood of this is dubious. However, one thing is certain, and that is, they did not understand that the results of the payment of ransom would not begin to be effective until Yahshua made his second presence. The heavenly class would be the first to receive this blessing. Those who had died in faith prior to 1913 received an instantaneous resurrection at that time. Those of that class who came in prior to 1913 and joined the remnant of the little flock would have to remain faithful unto death, after which they also received an instantaneous resurrection. See 1 Corinthians 15:51 and 52. With the passing away of the heavenly class, many who had accepted their teachings and who were not of this class but were of the other sheep or earthly class were left floundering without a heavenly representative here on earth. The reason Yahweh permitted this was because he was filled with indignation toward his people, Many of the children of the remnant began to strive for positions of authority. They became egotistical. We stand above, and there are no others who can compare with us, they claimed. The absence of the remnant presented no problem for them. They simply placed others in this class, which Yahweh's angel, with the seal of Yahweh, had completely sealed in 1913. See Revelation 6, 9-11, Revelation 7, 1-4, Matthew 24, 45-47. In this they are guilty of taking Yahweh's holy word lightly, being more concerned with their own acceptability in the eyes of other members than they were in striving to correctly teach Yahweh's word. Also, they did not wait for the return of the prophets of old, as Yahweh and his beloved Son had promised, and of which they were reminded continually by the remnant. See Psalm 45:16, Isaiah 1, 24-27, Isaiah 32, 1-5, Daniel 12, Matthew 8, 11 and 12, Luke 13, 28-30, Revelation 11, 18. Except for Psalm 45:16, which gives no limit of time, all of these other scriptures undeniably point out that these prophets would be back before Armageddon. Absolutely none are found to support Jehovah's Witnesses' contention that they will return after Armageddon. This is a reversal of what the Holy Remnant taught. They had emphatically stated that they would return at any time and that this was during the early 1940s. The other sheep were admonished to seek their advice and that they, or these resurrected prophets, would guide them in the way to go. Thus, those who claim to be following the remnant have now turned their backs on them. As if this was not enough to remove Yahweh's holy prophets from their assigned positions, they also substituted the elected heads, elected by men of the various congregations, to usurp and to fulfill their office. Individuals who possess absolutely no knowledge of their own and who would be completely lost without the guidance of an earthly mother to hold their hand and to guide them wherever she wants them to go. The true resurrected prophets will need no earthly mother, but will receive their instructions directly from the heavens, as they always have in the past. Isaiah 28, 9-11. This shows that these must be weaned from the remnant and stand on their own. These watchtower usurpers of the office given by Yahweh to his resurrected prophets alone will be cast into outer darkness soon if they do not submit to Yahweh's righteous channel of authority. Matthew 8, 11 and 12, and Luke 13, 28-30. Now we continue. And to bring righteousness everlasting. To bring in everlasting righteousness does not necessarily mean that this righteousness will at once be universally accepted, but does mean, as is stated, that righteousness is brought in or introduced on earth. In order for this to be fulfilled, it would not be sufficient to merely preach that the world will go down at Armageddon and that God's kingdom will then take over the administration thereof. No, but the members of Israel who are Yahweh's spokesmen on earth must be able to outline the program in detail of the kingdom administration on earth. First, that Yahweh will choose the ones who are to represent him and who are to administer his righteous rule. At the top of the list are the resurrected prophets of old, who proved their loyalty to Yahweh through all manner of trials. Secondly, 200 million of Israel, made up of people who, out of every nation, kindred, and tongue, who will align themselves with these resurrected prophets. These, together with the prophets, will make up the one body, one righteous administration. And finally, those who are persuaded or convinced, through visible proof, that Yahweh is certainly with Israel. These then will gladly accept citizenship in Israel under Yahweh's 200 million appointed rulers. The members of Israel, Yahweh's nation, must understand and teach that citizenship or the giving of allegiance to any of the nations of this world constitutes adultery, and such an one cannot be accepted to serve in Yahweh's holy temple or ruling administration. It goes without saying that he must not take up arms to champion the cause of any of these demonized and doomed nations. However, neither must he finance the building of the war machine of these various nations, for this is hypocrisy. This constitutes murder by proxy. It is adultery committed behind closed doors. But no one can hide from Yahweh. It is pure foolishness to even try, for Yahweh sees all of us at all times. He alone is all-wise and almighty. Yahweh will not permit filth in his holy organization. See Exodus 19:6, Leviticus 11:44, Deuteronomy 7:6. The unclean will be thrown out into utter darkness. This means that they will be forced out by Yahweh and lose all of the knowledge that they had previously attained. Israel must also be able to present and explain in detail a perfect system of government that will enrich each and every individual, both spiritually and materially. A pure and holy system that will not allow the use of filthy lucre, which at this time permits the most ruthless and unprincipled to gain the lion's share of the earth's resources. These super rich are in turn served by the politicians and blessed by the religionists of this satanic system. The fire of Yahweh's wrath will soon burn with fierce anger and consume all of the unrighteous. All in all, Israel must present the truth of Yahweh's word and perform it in a clean and uncontaminated manner. For where truth is contaminated with untruths, it can no longer be regarded as truth. The fact that the light of Yahweh's illuminating spirit is shining so much more brightly now than it did some 40 years ago, when the remnant was still in authority, gives Israel a great advantage. We find that we are now able to explain scriptures which at that time could not satisfactorily be explained. We are also able to make pure and holy decisions while walking along a highway that is now clear as glass, wherein most things are clearly visible, which at that time were still shrouded in the semi-darkness of the early dawn of the new day. For this reason, Yahweh now tells Jeremiah and all of Israel to separate the precious from the vile, and that then Israel would be as his mouth, Jeremiah 15:19. For it is Israel as a body that will glorify Yahweh, Isaiah 49:1-3. This means, first, that we must retain whatever truth was taught by the remnant and approved by Yahweh by being consistent with the new light. Second, clarify the teachings that were not quite clear. Thirdly, remove altogether errors in interpretation of scriptures which were believed and taught by the remnant. These errors came about by well-intentioned efforts on their part to explain some things that Yahweh had not made clear as yet. For instance, the beast that was and is not, and yet is, Revelation 17:8-11, was interpreted to mean the League of Nations when it was, and when the Second World War put an end to the League, it was not. When this war was ended, it is again, in the form of the UN. The truth is that it is composed of a world power, a beast that ruled at one time in the past, and was the dominant power at that time, in the form of the Holy Roman Empire. It then gradually lost its authority with the advent of the Reformation, but will soon again rise to guide the destiny of the world. The Pope is at this time campaigning and maneuvering for just this purpose, and will succeed in having himself chosen to lead. This begins 1260 days after Yahweh first sends out his army of enlightening messengers to cover every square foot of the earth with truth and soon to be executed judgments on this selfish, wicked, and demon-inspired world system. Likewise, none of the prophecies in either the book of Daniel or the book of Revelation are understood by the first children of the kingdom who call themselves Jehovah's Witnesses, but whom Yahweh has distinguished as Manasseh, named after the firstborn of Joseph, who was true Israel. Manasseh therefore pictured the firstborn of Israel in the last days, or Jehovah's Witnesses. However, carefully note that the birthright does not go to Manasseh, the firstborn, but to Ephraim, Genesis 48:9-19, Deuteronomy 33:17, Jeremiah 31:9. Ephraim is that portion of Israel which Yahweh gathers through his resurrected prophets, and together these will form the two witnesses mentioned in Revelation 11, but only after Manasseh has been judged and cleansed, as has already taken place with the first portion of Ephraim. For reasons of his own, Yahweh has seen fit to give the understanding of the prophecies and all of the deep and hidden meanings in the scriptures to Ephraim first. Manasseh must follow if they are to obtain Yahweh's blessings. The bringing in of everlasting righteousness began with the introduction and speaking of a pure language of truth as regards the vindication of Yahweh's name, a language that was precious because it accurately described the truth and pointed out the true issues at stake with no vile contaminants of compromises and inconsistencies to bring reproach on Yahweh's holy name. This began in April of 1973. Now we continue. To seal up the adultery, to blot out, to terminate. The word translated adultery is from the Hebrew hatzon, and literally means well-fed horses having their own way. Also, harlots were usually well-fed and had no moral restrictions on their behavior. This then means to put an end to all disloyal activities and duplicities in Israel, which only tends to cloud the meaning of the stand taken by Israel. From now on it will be Yahweh first, last, and always. And the prophets, the scripture continues. The prophet has to do with prophesying and deals with the prophecies. To seal them means to stamp the final seal of approval on the understanding of the prophecies. No longer will they be opened up and examined and re-examined only to substitute one false interpretation for another. The understanding is now correct, and the cases of false interpretation and doubt closed. And to anoint the Holy of Holies. The Holy of Holies are that portion of the tabernacle in the wilderness wherein was placed the Ark of the Covenant, typified the heavenly portion of Yahweh's kingdom. Herein Yahweh's presence was manifest. The high priest, who entered the Holy of Holies alone once a year and not without the shedding of the blood of a sacrifice, pictured that the true high priest Yahshua would lead the way for the rest of the priests, 144,000. The fact that this ritual was performed in a tent in the wilderness demonstrates that it was only typical, and the fact that none of the other priests followed Aaron into the Holy of Holies shows that the true sacrifice or ransom price had not as yet been paid for the redemption of their sins, and the way was not as yet open for the others to follow him in the heavens. The pattern for the tabernacle tent was dictated by Yahweh through Moses, and this pattern had to be followed strictly. Exodus 25, 9, and 40. Hebrews 8, 1-5. Most of the materials used and where they were used and what they were used for were typical. This subject will be discussed in detail in a future main article. It was the desire of David to build a house for the Ark of Yahweh. He was ill at ease at his house of cedar, for his conscience afflicted him when he compared the house that sheltered him and how much more substantial and structured it was than was the house of Yahweh, wherein he described the ark as dwelling within curtains, 2 Samuel 7, 1 and 2. The answer given to David by Yahweh through Nathan the prophet reveals Yahweh to be the true father of his children Israel, who wants to share their plight with them. As a true, loving, and unselfish father, he shows his concern not for himself, but for his children. I have never dwelt in any house since I brought the children of Israel out of Egypt, but I have lived in a tent. As Israel picked up their tents and moved from place to place, Yahweh's tent was also moved along with theirs. Did I ever ask a single one of Israel's leaders why they had not built me a house of cedar? No. Refer to 2 Samuel 7, 6-8, Moffats. When Yahshua continues in verses 9-16, he speaks not of a literal temple that was to replace the tent that housed the Ark of the Covenant, but of a house that would be built by one of David's descendants, Yahshua, pictured by Solomon. In these words spoken to David through Nathan, Yahweh turns our attention away from the building of a house of stone and wood to the peace and security that he will bring to his people Israel, and that the temple that would be built by David's descendant would be instrumental in this. The prophet Isaiah helps us zero in on the true meaning and purpose of this temple or house, Isaiah 2, 2-4. And it shall come to pass in the last days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established at the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow unto it. And many people shall go and say, Come ye, and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. And he will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. And he shall judge among the nations, and shall rebuke many people. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. The building of the temple by Solomon was not instituted by Yahweh, as was the tabernacle in the wilderness. Therefore its structure did not receive any of the detailed instructions that were given with a tent. When Yahweh referred to David's son building the temple, whose kingdom would last forever, he was of course referring to his beloved son Yahshua. Solomon, in building the temple on his own, was in a sense no different than Israel's disobedience in wanting and obtaining a king. But because they were only typical Israelites, Yahweh continued to make pictures of the future even in disobedience. The disobedience of Israel in wanting an earthly king to rule over them, even though earthly Israel was and will again be ruled by prophets, was used by Yahweh to picture that Israel would indeed have a king who would be placed in a supreme position over all of Yahweh's creation and would become Yahweh's executive officer. And that he indeed would be called God or mighty God, and that this kingdom given to him by Yahweh would last forever. Isaiah 9:6, Psalm 45:6. The temple built by Solomon pictured that there would truly be another building or another organization with another king who would replace the old tabernacle of the covenant with its strict, unyielding written law, where there was no room for mercy, and replaced with a new law established by a new high priest. Hebrews 7:12, Colossians 2:13-14. Thus the other building put up by Solomon foreshadowed the kingdom under Yahshua, and in this respect alone it met with Yahweh's approval. 2 Chronicles 5:13, 2 Chronicles 7:1-4. In what may appear as an oddity, Solomon, in building the temple on his own, without the strict overseeing by Yahweh, pictured that Yahshua would build up Yahweh's house entirely on his own. But in Yahshua's case, this did not take place until he was made the express image of the Father. Hebrews chapter 1, 2 Corinthians 4:4. This means that he was blessed with all wisdom and power. This also means that he now had the answers and solutions for all things as though he were Yahweh himself. With him, the kingdom will move forward exactly as it would if Yahweh were in charge. However, it is the will of Yahweh that his creatures administer the kingdom rule in full obedience to his divine will as spoken by Yahshua. Therefore, a portion of wisdom and knowledge will descend upon earthly Israel in order that they may carry their share of the responsibility of the administrations of government upon the earth. The wisdom possessed by Solomon, 1 Kings 4:29-34, and 1 Kings 10:1-9, was greater than all men. He was able to discuss all subjects and answer all questions. He was, in a sense, that is, as far as men are concerned, all wise. In this quality also he pictured Yahshua. To an outside observer, the kingdom would appear to be two governments, one in the heavens and the other on earth, as though each functioned independently of the other. But the binding tie is the strong, unbreakable bond made up of free moral agents who would have it no other way. 200 million who love Yahweh with all of their hearts, all of their life, and all of their strength. Life would be absolutely meaningless to us without our all-loving Father who has answered the prayers in our hearts and revealed himself to us. Made us secure in the understanding he has given us, gone to much lengths of reproach through disobedience of his creatures, whether deliberate or through ignorance. Ignorance brought about by Yahweh's arch-enemy, Satan the devil. Zechariah 14:4 reveals that the Mount of Olives, which is a fruit-bearing organization or kingdom, is in reality one mountain with a cleft running east and west, and half of the mountain shall move toward the north, the direction where rests the seat of guiding authority, and the other half moves toward the south, that portion of the kingdom that is beneath or opposite the north. Being opposite to the guiding portion, it naturally is in a position to receive guidance. However, it is one mountain and not two. It is the half that moves north and the other half that moves south. The guiding light from the heavens will be poured down upon the earthly portion of Israel in order that the earth may be ruled in wisdom and understanding, and Israel on earth will be responsible for the just, efficient, and smooth operation of all of the visible portion of Yahweh's kingdom. In a sense, we have two ruling organizations, inextricably bound together, and this is pictured by the 24 elders, 12 with crowns picturing Israel's authority in the heavens, and 12 elders wearing crowns picturing Israel's ruling authority on earth. Revelation 4, 4 and 10. Verse 25. You will understand through your searching, so-called, to look at or into, for the purpose of understanding, that between the utterance of the word and to build Jerusalem unto Moshiach, leader, or until the coming of Messiah, the supreme leader in Israel, making Yahshua part of the organization. Yahweh is not an Israelite. He is supreme, eternal, self-existent. He places all of his righteously disposed creatures who strive to do what is just and right, and therefore who strive for his blessing, in a divine office of responsibility to oversee that the divine attributes of Yahweh are continually employed for the blessing of all of his citizens of Israel. These citizens are the strangers, all who choose to obey the 200 million rulers in Israel. These will apply for citizenship in Yahweh's holy nation. They will not be rulers. They will simply rejoice for the opportunity to obey those who have proven their love for Yahweh with an unshakable faith, which they manifested through the many trials brought upon them by Satan and his demons. Weeks 7 shall be 7 weeks. This number has caused great confusion among would-be Bible scholars, in the same manner that its use and the use of the number 10 has stripped these same scholars when they try to interpret their significance in the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation. However, let us remain with Daniel 9:25. In this verse, 7 was not intended to have any numerical value whatsoever. It simply symbolizes heavenly completeness, or at the end of the divinely allotted time. Nothing happened in either 49 days or 49 years. The Messiah did not arrive at the end of either of these time lapses. And if this number is added to the 62 weeks of years, then the Messiah is cut off 49 years before he arrives, which does nothing to solve the dilemma. Therefore, the words Shavuim, Shiva, week 7, is not meant to be part of the total, but is used by Yahweh to trip the would-be wise men who strive to impress others with their personal wisdom. If someone of Daniel's era wanted to total 69, regardless of how primitive the language, he would not break up the number 9 into 7 and 2, while leaving a much larger sum, 60, shishim, to be expressed in a single word. He would most certainly say 60 and 9 or 9 and 60. Verse 25 then continues, and 60 and 2. These are two whole numbers and are not to be totaled with the number 7. Shava is a primitive root meaning to be complete, but it is used only as a denominative. Sheva or Shiva, 7, meaning to seven oneself. That is to swear as if repeating a declaration 7 times. To adjure, to take an oath, to seven oneself, to bind oneself. Therefore, Yahweh's Holy Spirit reveals that the interpretation is to read as follows. You will understand through your searching that between the utterance of the word to return to build Jerusalem until the coming of Messiah, our leader, will complete Yahweh's appointed time and total 62 weeks of years or 434 years. A period should then be placed after 62. The remainder of verse 25 deals only with the return of the Jews for the purpose of rebuilding their city. Quote, You will return in order to rebuild it with street and trench. For you, these will be distressful times. The difficulties experienced by the Jews are recorded in Ezra 4 and Nehemiah 4. Verse 26, And after the weeks 60 and 2, cut off shall be Moshiach, and ye are left with nothing without him. You must at this time have understood that the cardinal number is 62, not symbolic 7, nor the sum of 7 and 62. No, but 62, which is, as it were, the fulcrum of this prophecy, from which all other numbers are gauged and understood. If the number 7 were added to the 62, the resulting answer of 69 weeks of years, or 483 years, would have to serve as the length of time that it took for the Messiah to come after they received their order to return and to rebuild Jerusalem. And if he were cut off after only 62 weeks of years after this time, or after 434 years, then the impossible conclusion is that he was cut off several years before he arrived. The last portion of this translated sentence also requires an additional explanation. Note that it reads, and we are left with nothing without him. Notice also that the vision changes from the second person singular to the first person plural, from you and your to we. The Hebrew word ein, with a conjunction, vav, literally means and nothing. Lo, made up of lamed and vav, and means to him, but is often used in a negative. These two words are variously translated to mean, but not for himself. Authorized Version. And shall have nothing, Revised Standard Version. Leaving no successor, Moffat's. The people will disown him and have none of him, Ronald Knox. Of all of these versions, the Authorized Version may present the most logical contention, although we have no direct proof of how these words were to be interpreted. But not for himself could mean that he was cut off for others and not for himself, which could be backed up with the fact that he died for us and not for himself. But the word ein does not mean not. It means nothing. Also, we cannot truly say that the Messiah was not cut off or killed for himself, for in reality he was, in the sense that anyone taking his stand would meet with the same fate as the records of the faithful in Israel here bear out. The Watchtower, which translates the word ein correctly, still makes no sense in its translation. How can we consistently claim that the Messiah was cut off with nothing for himself, when he has inherited all things? The same argument applies to the translation rendered, and shall have nothing, Revised Standard Version. Moffat's translation, leaving no successor, is literally true, but this is not a translation at all. It simply states a fact. The same applies to Knox's translation. The people will disown him and have none of him. This is also true, but again not a translation. The faithful in Israel who were waiting for their captivity and agonizing existence to end based their hope on the coming of the Messiah. Daniel, who lived through every word and moment of the vision, saw his hopes built up to a glorious pitch with the verification of this beautiful promise of the Messiah's coming. Imagine the letdown, the hopelessness, the despair when he saw in vision the cutting off of the Messiah, saw his death. It was he, Daniel, who in harmony with the Holy Spirit, which allowed him to live through the whole episode. Thus in despair he says, and we are left with nothing without him. Vain lo, first person plural. It could only be these who had built up their hopes on his coming, those who expected to gain a blessing, who could properly say, vain lo, nothing without him. And the city and all that is sacred is forsaken, empty. It was Rome that finally destroyed a dying city, a city that had disobeyed and fought Yahweh for centuries. Now its temple was burned to the ground, and nearly all of the city was either burnt or otherwise destroyed. All of the walls were broken down, with the exception of the western one, and 3 towers also remained. This marks the final end of Jerusalem as a type, a type not of anything blessed for meeting with Yahweh's approval, but a type of a stubborn and consistently disobedient city. Yahweh let her seal her own doom after her final offense when she rejected Yahweh's only begotten Son, sentenced him to death because he interfered with her way of life, and because the leaders feared that they might lose their following to him and there would be no more glory for them to satisfy their ego. The Jews need not feel isolated when we associate disobedience with them, for Christendom fulfills everything that Jerusalem merely typified. If the Messiah were to come again in the flesh, which of course he never will because he died an everlasting death as a man, in order to pay the ransom and redeem us from a sentence of everlasting death. And if he were to go about setting up the kingdom of Yahweh and begin to exercise authority over the affairs of the earth, he would immediately be marked for death by all the heads of states over the entire earth. Oh no, they would not nail him to the cross or to a stake. This would be redundant and would make them look suspicious in the eyes of the people. No, but in the U.S., for one, the CIA would be commissioned to do the job, and they in turn would either hire a hitman or do the job themselves. Well, you bastards are not going to get away with it this time, for Yahweh is with his prophets and will protect them from the hand of the wicked. See Jeremiah 15:21. Now we continue with the Hebrew. People, leader, shall enter that final judicial degree in an overflow of angry judgment. With the loss of their city, conditions went from bad to worse for the Jews, and they were scattered all over the earth and persecuted from nation to nation. Now they did not have Yahweh's protection, a protection which they had rejected over and over again. However, in persecuting them, Satan would like to have you believe that they are still the true Lord's people, and many people along with the Jews still believe this to be true. This is not true, for the Israel Yahweh will be made up of obedient people of all nations and races. The leader mentioned here, who was the chief culprit in leading Jerusalem's disobedience, was the high priest, the one who should have known better, if his eyes had not been blinded by the reflection of his own image. Ego had not prevented him from arriving at the proper decision. Now we continue with Daniel 9. And until the end, warfare, including murders, overthrowing of powers, troubles in a continuous stream until it all flows into Armageddon. And from this time on are determined horrors. This statement reverts back to the time that the Messiah was killed and the city destroyed, wherein the calamities that befell the Jews have already been described. Verse 27, And a great Lord with a covenant, or shall come to an agreement, or an understanding, shall greatly increase with the majority of the people, or shall grow in recognition by gaining an ever-increasing following, for week one, or for 1 week. This was the ecumenical and world peace movement almost entirely engineered by Pope Paul between 1959 and 1966, and cut into the week, or a week, or half a whole week, shall cause the everlasting seat of authority to be slaughtered as a sacrifice and offering. The everlasting seat of authority, which is Yahweh in his will, that is performed by his creatures in a descending channel of authority from Yahweh down to the earth. This authority is brutally attacked, conquered by overwhelming forces, and outlawed, by Yahweh's permission of course, in order to bring to light the true beastly governments and their religious allies who are altogether under demon control and worthy of everlasting death, even as the Jerusalem of old. Thus temporarily his will is killed or burnt and completely consumed, and a sacrifice does not exist any longer. And upon those whom he has cornered, kanaf in Hebrew, to place in a corner, to isolate, a detestable and appalling abomination. To those whom he convinces to follow him, he has the detestable and awesome monstrosity of an organization to offer them. This will completely take away their basic freedoms, which at this time they at least enjoy. This monstrosity will render all people desolate by employing an iron rule that will turn all people into his personal robots. Even until the allotted time be accomplished for the complete destruction of this one who has been appointed in command by Russia and the United States, by making himself acceptable, liked, favored, become popular by appearing to be on everybody's side. But in reality, he is truly what Yahweh describes him as, this side chamber or judge's chamber, where decisions are often made, of deceit and oppression, shall himself be rendered desolate. Revelation 17:16. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and burn her with fire. The 10 horns, symbolizing 10 kings, refer to Revelation 17:12, represent all of the political rulers on earth. These scriptures refer to the organization, the Catholic hierarchy, over which the Pope of Rome is placed as head, also refer to Daniel 7:8. This vision was not understood by the Israel of old, except for the portions which speak of the coming of Messiah and of eventual restoration of the kingdom of Israel to be ruled over by Moshiach. He would usher in everlasting righteousness and peace and put an end to the agonies that the Israel of old had experienced from its very beginning. The cutting off of the Messiah seemed to be a contradiction and was not understood, for how could it be that the one who was to bring in everlasting blessings be himself cut off? They did believe that someday Jerusalem would be rebuilt on earth, but overall this vision did not leave a clear understanding on just how things were going to proceed and eventually materialize. But of course it was not recorded for them, for they did not live at the time that the ransom was to be completely fulfilled, nor was the Israel of the flesh or the Israel of old the true Israel of God, and true blessings could never come to them or through them, as the killing of their Messiah clearly demonstrated. It is given to the Israel of promise, which is made up of people of goodwill of all nationalities and races, to understand this vision, for they are the only obedient ones on the earth. It is they who will bring Yahweh glory, and it is therefore to them and them alone that Yahweh reveals his darkest secrets, for they alone will do justice to the understanding and bring honor to him. 434 years are given as the time that it would take, as counted from the time that the word was spoken to return to build Jerusalem until the coming of the Messiah. But a total of 490 years are given as being required to bring an end to the curse that afflicted them, to bring an everlasting righteousness, and to anoint the Holy of Holies, or the Most Holy. Yahweh has revealed to his servant, his Israel of promise, that the difference between these two figures, that is, when 434 years was subtracted from 490, that the resulting 56 years would be the time that it would take to anoint the Most Holy, or 56 years after the coming of the Messiah. Though Israel did not understand this, Yahshua understood everything except what Yahweh, for righteous reasons of his own, chose to withhold. And Yahweh chose to withhold the fact that nearly 2,000 years would transpire before the actual fulfillment, even though the prophecy is true as written, now that Yahweh has revealed all of the details. Yahshua correctly subtracted the 434 years from the 490, the only one in Israel to do so. He then expected to return and begin his kingship 56 years after his first coming on earth. If his age at his death is subtracted from the 56 years, we find that he expected to return about 22 and a half years later. Therefore, we find him making such statements as Matthew 16:28, 23:36, and 24:34, Mark 9:1. For a while, even Yahweh's restored Israel could not understand these scriptures clearly because of following the initial understanding taught by the remnant. This will not happen again, as Yahweh's Israel of promise is now supreme upon the earth. And soon all errors will be corrected by them, for so Yahweh has commanded us. See Jeremiah 15:19. We have evidence that Yahshua knew that his return will be fulfilled by an heavenly administration, Matthew 24:30, Daniel 7:13, Exodus 1:26. But the Israel of the flesh, like the Christians of this world today, understood nothing of this. And concerning his restored Jerusalem, Yahweh has more to tell his people, as revealed by this same vision of Daniel's. It is understood by his true people today that the real and permanent Jerusalem is an heavenly Jerusalem, and that the one understood by the Jews to be restored was an earthly one, and it was only meant by Yahweh to be typical. Typical in that the true Jerusalem would be built after the typical one was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. Typical also in that Moshiach would come to his people Israel and bless them, but because they were not true Israel, they themselves prevented this. Some of the agony in Yahshua's heart is recorded in Matthew 23:37. Ephraim has experienced the same situation with Manasseh. And in fact, those in authority in Manasseh are behaving in an identical manner as the Israel of the flesh behaved toward Yahshua. The venom that they possess for Ephraim is the same as the venom possessed by the Jews toward Yahshua. Yahweh will judge them shortly with a mighty arm that will place them permanently where they belong. For Yahweh's indignation is very great toward them at this time, and is increasing with each passing day. As Ephraim saw many of its own members cast into outer darkness, she will likewise see the same judgment poured out upon Manasseh, especially its overseers, for they are cruel, cowardly, egotistical, and low, a lowness which ranks with the lowest. The last portion of verse 25 states, "You will return in order to build it with street and trench." The question is, if this was only a type, and it only pictures the heavenly Jerusalem that was to be built, and it was the heavenly Jerusalem that was to bring in the everlasting blessings, were there any clues concerning this in Daniel's vision? You will return in order to rebuild it with Rohov Vehorutz. Another meaning for Rohov, translated street, is broad or wide place, breadth, unlimited measureless, wide street. A street is also symbolic of a course taken, a way of life, or a purpose intended. And the word horutz, spoken in Solomon's time, had two other meanings, gold for one, and strict decision the other. Psalm 68:13, though ye have lion among the pots, yet shall ye be as the wings of a dove, covered with silver, kesef, and her feathers with horutz, yellow gold. Zechariah 9:3, and Tyrus did build herself a stronghold, and heaped up silver as dust, and horutz, fine gold, as the mire of the streets. Joel 3:14, multitudes in the valley of horutz, decision. For the day of the Lord is near in the valley of horutz, decision. Thus, putting it into English, we would have it described in this manner. You will return, the 144,000 made up of true Israel, in order to rebuild it, of which the apostles made up the 12 foundation stones, and the balance of the 144,000 make up the rest of the city. For its total measurements are 144,000 furlongs, each furlong symbolic of a member. With Rohov, broad way of gold, whose breadth and scope of purpose and strict decision cannot be measured. See Revelation 21:21, Revelation 19:12, Revelation 19:15, Nahum 1:9. All right, Israel, it's been a privilege to make this tape. It's some form of communication. I know it's Yahweh's will for me to remain out here until I find out everything that has to be learned, until it is all put together into one mass knowledge of understanding that will place every would-be scholars, whether scriptural or scientific, in their proper position and raise Israel above all. In this manner, we will separate the precious from the vile and truly glorify Yahweh. I love you all and pray for you each and every day. And I pray also that soon we will be reunited and that we may proceed with Yahweh's work and begin the 1260 days which will glorify Yahweh forevermore. Good night.